Let me tell you something. When we were young, most of us believed that happiness was somewhere out there in the achievements. We chased the titles, we earned the numbers in our bank accounts. I've spent more than 30 years working with people over 50. And here's the interesting part. Almost everyone eventually admits that most of their life was guided by a very subtle illusion. The illusion that if they could just achieve one more thing, try a little harder, happiness would finally arrive. But by the time they reach 60, they look back and realize none of those things were ever strong enough to hold their peace for long. I want you to imagine an autumn afternoon. You're sitting in a quiet home, surrounded by memories of a whole lifetime. Old trophies, a photo of you being recognized at work, a gift someone gave you many years ago. These things might make you smile, yet they cannot keep your heart steady when worry comes. Have you ever felt that way? Joy from the outside can lift us for a moment, but it fades as quickly as a leaf falling on a late-season breeze. In modern psychology, people call this the reward cycle. The more we achieve, the more we crave. The brain adapts to the excitement of a new success and quickly demands another. But in Eastern philosophy, the idea is simpler. What arises from the outside will disappear with the outside. And I believe that is absolutely true. It's not that wealth, status, or accomplishments have no value. They simply were never built to give us lasting peace. I once met a man named Robert, now 68. He spent his entire life working tirelessly to build a career he was deeply proud of. But on the morning he retired, he told me, "I realized I never truly lived. I just ran." And it wasn't until he began sitting quietly for just 10 minutes each morning, breathing, being present, turning inward, that he felt something he had lost for decades, a sense of being fully here. What turning 60 offers us isn't just experience. It's the chance to enter the most profound stage of life, coming home to ourselves, not seeking more, but shedding what no longer matters. When you learn to be still each day, even for a few minutes, you'll notice something surprising. Joy is not a destination to reach. It is the natural state that appears when the mind is no longer pulled around by endless desires. And that right there is where real peace begins, not out there, but deep within you. Let me share something I've heard hundreds of times from people in their 60s and 70s. I don't want to bother anyone. It sounds humble, doesn't it? Even noble. But with time, I realized it often hides a quiet fear, the fear of becoming a burden. And if you've ever felt that, I want you to know this: you're not alone, truly. Many people at this stage of life avoid asking for help even when they need it. They don't want to inconvenience their children, trouble a neighbor, or interrupt a friend. But here's the paradox I've seen again and again in my work. The more we refuse to ask for help, the more isolated we become. And that isolation, not aging itself, is what makes life heavier. I once worked with a woman named Linda, 72. She lived alone after her husband passed away. Her children loved her dearly, but she never reached out. Not when she slipped on the porch. Not when she felt overwhelmed. Not even when she needed someone to drive her to a medical appointment. She told me, "I don't want to be someone they have to take care of." But when her daughter finally learned what had been happening, she cried and said, "Mom, letting us help you is how we love you." And that moment opened something inside Linda. She realized she had spent years protecting her pride while her family simply wanted connection. I want you to imagine this for a moment. Asking for help is not a declaration of weakness. It's a gesture of trust, a doorway to relationship. It says, "I'm human and I value you enough to let you in." In spiritual traditions and even in modern psychology, the act of allowing yourself to receive support is seen as a practice of humility. Not humiliation, humility. The soft recognition that we are interdependent beings, that no one at any age was meant to carry life alone. And here's the truth. I wish more people would understand. When you ask for help, you're not taking something away from others. You're giving them an opportunity to show care, to strengthen the bond, to feel needed. So if you've been afraid of being a burden, what if that fear is just another illusion? What if letting someone help you is not the end of your independence, but the beginning of a deeper connection? You deserve support. You deserve companionship. And you deserve to know that allowing others to walk beside you is one of the most human and most courageous things you can do. Let me tell you a truth that often reveals itself only after many decades of living. Not everything we start is meant to be finished, and finishing by itself is not always a virtue. When I talk with people in their 60s or 70s, many of them carry a quiet pressure. The belief that they must complete every task, every project, every obligation, even when it no longer brings meaning, joy, or purpose. It's as if there's an invisible voice whispering, "You started it. You have to see it through." But I want you to pause with me for a moment and ask yourself, who said so? And why do we believe them? There's a kind of wisdom that only comes with age. The wisdom to recognize that life is not a checklist, and you don't owe completion to anything that drains your spirit. In fact, I've met many people who spent years finishing things that no longer mattered, simply because they felt guilty letting go. I once worked with a man named Charles, 67, who insisted on maintaining a large garden even though his knees hurt and he no longer enjoyed it. When I asked him why, he said, "I've taken care of this yard for 30 years. I can't just stop." But when he finally allowed himself to let go selling his lawn equipment and turning the space into a simpler, low-maintenance garden, he told me, "I didn't realize how much of my life I'd been forcing. I feel lighter now, like I got a piece of myself back." Letting go is not laziness, it's clarity. I want you to imagine holding a rope for too long. Your hands start to burn, not because the rope is harmful, but because you refuse to release it. Many of us carry tasks, responsibilities, and habits that have long outlived their purpose. And the older we get, the more precious our time and energy become. In spiritual teachings, this is called right effort, the understanding that not all effort leads to growth. Sometimes the most profound act of wisdom is choosing what not to continue. And here's something I truly believe: by letting go of what no longer serves you, you create space for what truly matters: peace, presence, relationships, and the small joys that make this stage of life so deeply meaningful. So the next time you feel obligated to finish something that feels empty, ask yourself, is this worth my remaining time? Is this nourishing me or just keeping me busy? You've lived long enough to know this truth. Stopping at the right moment is not failure, it is maturity. It is freedom. It is the quiet, powerful wisdom of someone who has finally learned to choose their own life. Let me share something I've witnessed again and again in people entering the later chapters of life: the quiet urge to hold on to possessions, to reputation, to the idea of leaving a legacy that proves we were here. It's completely human, and yet it can become one of the most subtle illusions of aging. I've met people who cling tightly to every object they own, every investment, every family heirloom, not because they still bring joy, but because letting go feels like losing a part of themselves. Others hold on to how they used to be: the strong parent, the successful professional, the pillar of the family, afraid that releasing that image means becoming invisible. If you've ever felt that, I want you to know you're not alone, and you're not doing anything wrong. You're simply human. But here's the truth I've learned after decades of working with people over 50. When we cling too tightly to our wealth, our reputation, or our legacy, we stop living in the present and start living in a future that may never come. We become guardians of a museum of memories instead of participants in the life that's happening right now. I once sat with a man named Henry, 74, who kept every possession from his working years: awards, files, memorabilia, even old office equipment. When I gently asked why he held on to it all, he said, "If I give these away, what will prove that I mattered?" Later, after donating half of it to a local community center and gifting the rest to people he loved, he told me with tears in his eyes, "I didn't lose anything. I actually felt free. No, I was carrying so much weight." There is a beautiful spiritual principle that appears in nearly every tradition. Giving is liberation. Not because others need what we have, but because we need the lightness that comes from opening our hands. I want you to imagine this for a moment. Instead of holding wealth as if it can protect you, you let it flow to the people and causes you care about. Instead of clinging to an old identity, you step into the present moment with honesty. Instead of trying to carve your name into the future, you offer kindness, wisdom, and generosity now in ways that are deeply felt and remembered. Legacy is not what we leave behind. Legacy is what we release with grace. And the truth is, letting go does not erase who you are. It reveals the you beyond possessions, beyond achievements, beyond the fear of being forgotten. So if you feel yourself clinging to the things you've built, ask gently, is this helping me live fully today, or keeping me tied to yesterday? Because sometimes the greatest gift of this stage of life is the permission to finally open your hands and discover how light you can be when you stop holding on so tightly. Let me speak to something I've seen touch the hearts of so many people after retirement. Sometimes gently, sometimes like an unexpected storm, the moment when the role you carried for decades simply falls away. For 30 or 40 years, you introduce yourself through your work. I'm a teacher, I'm an engineer, I'm a manager, I'm a nurse. And without even realizing it, your job becomes the lens through which you see yourself. It becomes your structure, your identity, your rhythm, your reason to get up each morning. But then one day, that role is no longer yours, not because you failed, but because life moved forward. And here's what many people quietly confess to me. It feels like a part of me disappeared. Who am I now? I feel empty. If you've ever felt something like that, I want you to know this. It is one of the most normal, most human transitions of later life. And it is not a sign that anything is wrong with you. I once worked with a man named Samuel, 71, who had been a doctor for nearly half a century. After retiring, he told me, when people stopped calling me doctor, I didn't know what was left. But a few months later, after spending more time in silence, meditation, and simple daily living, he said something that stayed with me for years. I discovered that I was never the title, I was the awareness behind it, awareness. And that is the heart of this illusion. Your career was a role you played, a meaningful role, perhaps even a beautiful one, but never the whole of who you are. When the costume drops and the stage lights dim, what remains is something much deeper. The quiet, spacious presence that has been with you your entire life. The consciousness that loved, wondered, suffered, learned, and grew long before any job title existed. Let me ask you something gently. When you wake up in the morning and sit for a moment before doing anything, who is that you? The one who is simply aware. The one who feels the breath moving. The one who notices thoughts rising and falling like waves. That is the real self, not the resume, not the achievements, not the label society placed on you. In spiritual traditions, this is called returning to the formless self. The self that is not defined by status, productivity, or social value. In psychology, it's the shift from role identity to core identity. And for many people over 60, this is one of the most profound awakenings they ever experience. Losing a career is not losing yourself. It is losing the mask so you can finally meet the person underneath. So if you're in a season where your old roles are fading, I invite you to sit quietly with this question. Who am I when no one is watching and no one needs anything from me? The answer is softer, deeper, more spacious than you might expect. And discovering it may be the most liberating chapter of your life. Let me ask you something gently. When was the last time you looked at someone else's life, their health, their family, their success, their luck, and felt a quiet sting inside, a heaviness, a whisper saying, "Why not me? Why am I not there?" If you're nodding right now, you're in the company of almost everyone I've ever met over 60. Comparison is one of the last illusions we shed as we grow older, and sometimes one of the hardest. You see, comparing yourself to others is like looking at the night sky and envying the brightness of a star without knowing how long it had to burn to shine that way, or how close it is to fading. We only ever see the surface of someone's life, their highlight moments, their good days, never the storms that shaped them. I once worked with a woman named Valerie in her early 70s who constantly compared herself to her sister. She's healthier, she's more active, her children visit more often. But one day her sister confided to me privately, "I wish I had Valerie's calm. I wish I had her patience. I wish I had her way with people." Two women both envying the pieces of life they couldn't see clearly. That's the trap of comparison. It distorts the truth, hides your own progress, and blinds you to the beauty of your personal path. I want you to imagine something for a moment. You're standing on a long road, your road. Every challenge you survived, every joy you tasted, every loss that shaped you. They're all stepping stones beneath your feet. No one else has walked this exact path. No one else could. And you, in turn, cannot walk theirs. So how can their pace, their achievements, their experiences ever be a fair measurement for your life? Here's the question I ask many of my clients, and I want to offer it to you now. Are you even comparing the right things? Because the only meaningful comparison is this. Are you a little more peaceful than last year? A little wiser than a decade ago? A little softer? More understanding, more aware than the person you once were? Spiritual traditions describe this as the inner yardstick, the shift from measuring life outwardly to measuring it inwardly. Psychology calls it self-referenced growth, and it's one of the strongest predictors of well-being in later life. The truth is, you don't need to be better than anyone else. You only need to be more yourself. So the next time your mind wanders toward comparison, gently bring it back and ask, how have I grown? What have I learned? What quiet strength have I earned through my own journey? Because your life isn't meant to match anyone else's. It's meant to unfold exactly as yours, beautifully, imperfectly, unmistakably unique. Let me tell you something I've learned after spending decades sitting with people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. Sometimes the heaviest weight we carry isn't age or illness or regret, it's people. Not all people, just the ones who drain us, the ones we tolerate out of habit, guilt, or a misunderstanding of what compassion really means. Many of us were raised to believe that being kind means being endlessly available. That being loving means absorbing other people's chaos. That being spiritual means accepting every demand, every complaint, every emotional storm, silently, gently, without boundaries. But let me ask you this. When did compassion ever mean self-abandonment? When did kindness require you to exhaust your own spirit? You see, true compassion has two wings. One is love, and the other, just as important, is wisdom. I once worked with a woman named Teresa, 69, who spent years letting a toxic friend drain her energy. Every phone call left her anxious.
Every visit left her exhausted. Every interaction chipped away at her peace. When I asked her why she kept enduring it, she said, "I don't want to hurt her feelings. I want to be a good person." But I gently told her a good person doesn't let themselves be harmed in the name of love. And after she finally created distance, she said something profound. "I didn't lose a friend. I reclaimed myself." Setting boundaries is not rejecting others. It is recognizing your own sacred space. It is saying, "My peace matters too." And that in spiritual practice is considered an act of deep mindfulness. I want you to picture a candle for a moment. If you let the wind batter it from all directions, the flame won't survive. But when you place a glass around it, not to hide the light, but to protect it, the flame becomes steady, warm, and able to shine farther. That glass is your boundary. Some people come into your life to uplift you. Others come with storms of their own storms you were never meant to weather for them. And the wisdom of aging, the quiet, hard-earned wisdom, is learning the difference. So if you're carrying relationships that leave you depleted, ask yourself gently, is this kindness, or is this habit? Is this compassion, or is this fear of disappointing someone? And what would my life feel like if I allowed myself to protect my own energy? You are allowed to guard your peace. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to choose relationships that nourish your spirit instead of draining it. Because tending to your own well-being is not selfish. It is the mature, grounded spiritual act of someone who finally understands that their light deserves to stay lit. Let me share something tender. Something many people in their 60s and 70s quietly struggle with, the belief that they must continue living exactly as they always have, even when it no longer fits who they are now. It's almost as if we carry a silent rule inside. I've lived this way for decades, so I must keep going. But life, especially life after 50, after 60, is not meant to be a museum. It's meant to evolve, soften, and adjust. I often sit with people who feel guilty for wanting to change their routines. They say things like, "I've always cooked for the whole family. I can't stop now. I've stayed in this big house for years. Moving would feel like giving up. I used to be so active. I can't slow down, can I?" And behind these sentences is a quiet fear. The fear of admitting that life is changing, that the body has different needs, that the heart longs for a gentler rhythm. But let me ask you something gently. Who decided that your past should dictate your future? Why must today fit into the shape of yesterday? I once worked with a woman named Eleanor, 73. All her life she cooked elaborate meals, hosted every holiday, and kept her home spotless. But after her health began to shift, even simple tasks left her exhausted. Still, she pushed herself, and when I asked why, she said, "Because this is who I've always been." A few months later, after letting her children take over holiday dinners and simplifying her routines, she told me with tears in her eyes, "I didn't lose my identity. I gained my life back." That's the wisdom of aging, the ability to adjust, not out of weakness, but out of deep self-respect. In spiritual teachings, flexibility is seen as a sign of inner strength. In psychology, it's called adaptive living, one of the strongest predictors of well-being in older adults. And in real life, it simply feels like this: breathing a little easier, moving through the day without unnecessary strain, letting go of what is too heavy. I want you to imagine a river for a moment, wide, calm, flowing. The river does not cling to the shape it had 10 miles upstream. It changes, bends, adapts, and that is what allows it to keep moving with grace. You are that river. Your life is allowed to change. So if a habit, routine, or way of living no longer serves you, no longer brings peace, no longer nourishes who you are becoming, perhaps that's not a loss. Perhaps it's an invitation.
An invitation to lighten your load, to honor the body you have today, to create a lifestyle that feels soft, manageable, and true. You don't have to preserve the past. You only need to care for the present you. And sometimes the most courageous act of aging is simply allowing yourself to live differently, not as you always have, but as you deserve to now. As someone who has spent decades working with people over 50, guiding them, listening to their stories, and walking with them through the inner landscapes of aging, I have seen many illusions rise and fall in the human mind. But among all of them, there is one illusion that stubbornly lives on, generation after generation. The belief that the more you suffer, the more sacred your path becomes. That pain is proof of devotion. That spiritual growth must somehow be earned through hardship, self-denial, or endurance. I have heard this illusion whispered in temples, spoken softly in meditation circles, and even confessed in private conversations where people reveal their deepest insecurities. If it hurts, it must be working. Maybe I have to suffer to purify myself. If the path feels easy, am I doing it wrong? Perhaps God or the universe wants me to struggle. Let me speak to you as someone who has walked this earth for 60 years, who has studied philosophy, lived in monastic settings, and sat with many aging souls who come seeking peace. Pain is not a prerequisite for awakening. Suffering is not a spiritual currency, and self-punishment is not a path to enlightenment. Human beings naturally associate value with difficulty. This conditioning begins early. If you work hard, you will be rewarded. No pain, no gain. What comes easily cannot be trusted. The world is a test. And while these ideas can be useful in mundane life, career, responsibility, discipline, they become distortions when applied to the inner world. The spiritual journey is not like climbing a mountain where you must prove your worth to reach the top. It is more like returning home. But many older adults I speak with carry emotional burdens shaped by decades of guilt, regret, and a sense of unworthiness. They think, I must pay for my mistakes. I must endure pain to cleanse my past. Peace is only for those who earn it the hard way. This illusion becomes especially strong with age because we carry long memories. We remember the hurts we've caused and the hurts we have endured. We fear that serenity is something we no longer deserve. But this is not wisdom. This is simply the voice of shame wearing a spiritual mask. During my time living in spiritual communities, I met several practitioners who were proud, quietly, subtly, but unmistakably proud of how much they could endure. Fasting excessively, meditating until their legs trembled, depriving themselves of comfort, refusing help, pushing their bodies far beyond their limits. On the surface, it looked like discipline, but beneath it, I often saw ego, and ego disguised as devotion. Some would silently think, I suffer more than others, so my path is superior. My pain proves my commitment. I'm more spiritual because I can bear more hardship. This is not enlightenment. This is spiritual vanity, a subtler, more dangerous version of arrogance because it hides behind the illusion of virtue. True spiritual practice has nothing to do with proving anything to anyone, including yourself. Real awakening is quiet. It is gentle. It is humble. It does not need to announce itself through self-inflicted pain. One of the saddest patterns I see is people treating their own bodies as obstacles, something to conquer, punish, or suppress. Especially after 50 or 60, many feel betrayed by their physical form. The body slows down, it aches, it demands rest. So they think, my body is weak, therefore I must push harder. If I suffer physically, my spirit will become stronger. But the body is not a prison. The body is not a punishment. The body is not a test. The body is your oldest companion. It has carried you through every joy, every sorrow, every decade of your life. Even now, with all its limitations, it is doing its best. Treating your body with violence, fasting too harshly, meditating in pain, refusing food or comfort does not open the door to awakening.
it closes it. Gentleness with the body is not indulgence, it is wisdom. It is respect for the vessel that carries your consciousness. A peaceful spirit cannot grow in a body that is being bullied. If awakening does not require suffering, then what does it require? From my years of teaching, I've found that the true path rests on 3 pillars. Not through force, but through clarity. Not through pain, but through sincerity. Reflection is not self-punishment. It is simply seeing one's own mind without distortion. Compassion is not something you give only to others. It must begin with your own wounded parts. If your spiritual practice is harsh, cold, or rigid, it is not spiritual practice, it is inner warfare. Balance is the forgotten virtue of aging. It asks you to listen to your body, your breath, your energy. A balanced practice does not push, it guides. It does not demand, it invites. It does not punish, it uplifts. As we age, several psychological patterns strengthen. People over 50 often carry silent regrets, choices they wish they'd made differently. Some think they must catch up spiritually by pushing harder. Many were raised in environments where hardship was equated with virtue. Pain becomes a misguided attempt to purify past wounds. But the truth is this: healing does not accelerate through suffering. Healing accelerates through honesty and gentleness. You don't cleanse old pain by creating new pain. You cleanse old pain by finally refusing to inflict pain on yourself. Across many traditions, the idea of purification appears, but it is often misunderstood. Purification does not mean starving yourself, living in discomfort, forcing impossible discipline, rejecting pleasure, suppressing emotions. Purification simply means removing what is false. False beliefs, false identities, false fears, false guilt, false expectations, false stories about who you must be. The real impurities are psychological, not physical. Self-hate is an impurity. Shame is an impurity. Fear of unworthiness is an impurity. These cannot be burned away by making your body suffer. They can only dissolve under the light of awareness. If a practice makes you tense, anxious, exhausted, ashamed, overwhelmed, or disconnected from others, it is not serving your awakening. Real spirituality is spacious. It is soft. It releases rather than constricts. If your meditation leaves you peaceful, your breath smooth, your heart open, then you are on the right path. If your practice leads you to judge others or yourself, you are drifting into delusion. It takes more strength to forgive yourself than to punish yourself. It takes more courage to rest than to endure needless suffering. It takes more maturity to be gentle than to be harsh. In my 60 years, I have learned this unshakable truth. Self-compassion is the supreme discipline of the spiritual path. Anyone can endure pain, but not everyone can open their heart. Not everyone can face their wounds without attacking themselves. Not everyone can practice kindness toward the parts they dislike. This is the true challenge and the true liberation. The great teachers of the past never said, "Make yourself suffer." They said, "Know yourself. Be compassionate. Walk the middle path. Live in the present." Awakening is not a mountain to be conquered. It is a cloud dissolving. It is a knot loosening. It is a burden finally set down after being carried for too long. Suffering tightens the mind. Ease opens it. Suffering limits awareness. Ease expands it. Suffering makes the heart defensive. Ease makes the heart receptive. When you stop associating pain with spiritual value, something beautiful happens. You breathe more naturally. You begin to trust life again. You stop fighting your own humanity. You treat your aging body with dignity. You practice not from fear, but from love. You stop trying to earn peace and start allowing it. You realize that awakening is not something you chase. It is something you stop resisting. And as the resistance falls away, you see, there was never anything to prove. There was only something to understand. And that understanding is gentle. The illusion that spiritual practice must be painful is born from misunderstanding, shame, and cultural conditioning.
But the truth, the deeply liberating truth, is that awakening is not the reward for suffering. Awakening is what remains when you stop creating suffering. Pain may appear on the path, but it is not the path. Discomfort may arise, but it is not the goal. Challenges may come, but they are not badges of honor. In the end, spiritual maturity is measured not by how much you can endure, but by how softly you can walk through your own inner world. And that softness, that gentleness, that compassion is what makes the path sacred. You know, after spending decades studying the human mind, and even more years simply living as a human being, I've learned that one of the most stubborn illusions we carry, especially as we get older, is the need to always be right. It hides in our conversations, in our arguments, even in our quiet thoughts. It's that tightening in the chest when someone disagrees, that urge to correct another person before they finish speaking, that subtle pride when we win a debate, even if winning leaves the relationship weaker, not stronger. And if we're honest with ourselves, especially those of us over 50 or 60, we know this tendency didn't appear overnight. It grew with us. It grew from years of being responsible, being the one others leaned on, being the one who knew what to do. But here's the truth I want to share with you gently as someone who has walked through this illusion myself. The need to always be right doesn't make us wise. It makes us lonely. By the time we reach our later years, we've built up decades of experience. We've made decisions, raised families, built careers, survived hardships. And naturally, experience gives us confidence, a good and necessary confidence. But experience also gives us something else: attachment. We begin to attach to our ways of thinking, our interpretations, our sense of how the world works. And slowly, without noticing, our identity becomes wrapped around our opinions. So when someone disagrees, it doesn't just feel like they're challenging an idea, it feels like they're challenging us. Who we are, what we've lived through, what we believe gives our life coherence. And so we defend, we argue, we protect our rightness like it's a piece of land we can't afford to lose. But what exactly are we protecting? Most of the time it's not truth, it's not wisdom, it's not love. We're protecting our ego, that fragile internal voice that fears being exposed, corrected, or humbled. Let me share something I've seen repeatedly in people I've worked with over the years. The need to always be right comes with a high price. It strains relationships with children who grow tired of being lectured. It pushes friends away because no one feels safe disagreeing. It closes the door to new insights because learning requires humility. It hardens the heart, turning curiosity into judgment. And the saddest part, the more someone clings to being right, the less peace they actually feel. Inside, they live with tension, the tension of constantly defending an identity instead of simply being who they are. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to argue just to win, how heavy your chest feels afterward, how the conversation lingers in your mind, replaying itself again and again? That is the emotional cost of this illusion. And most people don't realize they're paying it until the loneliness sets in. From a spiritual perspective, the need to always be right comes from one source: fear. Fear of being seen as less capable, fear of losing control, fear of appearing weak, fear that our lived years will be dismissed, fear that without strong opinions we have no solid ground to stand on. But spirituality, real spirituality, invites a different path, a path where truth is not something we own, but something we discover together.
A path where humility is not weakness, but deep strength. A path where the ego loosens, allowing the heart to breathe freely again. When you give up the need to be right, you don't become smaller. You become more spacious, and in that space, wisdom returns. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine sitting with someone who doesn't need to win the conversation. Someone who listens more than they speak. Someone whose presence feels soft, steady, unthreatening. Someone who can say, "I might be wrong. Tell me more." How do you feel around such a person? Safe, open, respected, understood. Now imagine becoming that person, not for show, not to please others, but because your heart has grown spacious enough to hold disagreement without contracting. That is the freedom that comes from letting go of the illusion of always being right. You begin to realize you don't need to correct every detail. You don't need to dominate every discussion. You don't need to impose your truth on someone else's experience. You don't need to prove your intelligence or your worth. You discover that harmony feels better than victory. Connection feels better than dominance. Learning feels better than defending. And most importantly, peace feels better than being right. One of the most surprising things about aging wisely is this. The older you get, the more comfortable you become with not knowing. When I was younger, I thought wisdom meant having answers. But now at 60, I see that wisdom is recognizing the vastness of what I don't know. Not knowing is not a flaw. It is the doorway to spiritual honesty. When you can say, "I don't know," and that's okay, you open yourself to growth that rigid certainty can never offer. The universe doesn't reward perfection, it rewards openness. The mind that admits uncertainty is the mind that can learn, evolve, soften, and deepen. If we release the need to be right, what takes its place? 3 powerful qualities. You stop waiting for your turn to argue and start hearing the person in front of you. Instead of defending your viewpoint, you become genuinely interested in how others see the world. You realize that understanding someone is far more important than proving them wrong. These qualities transform relationships. They turn conversations into bridges instead of battlegrounds. Here is a small practice I invite you to try. The next time you feel the urge to correct someone, pause and ask yourself, is this coming from love or from ego? If it's ego, breathe. Relax your shoulders. Let the moment soften. Then ask, is being right worth more than being connected? Most of the time, the answer will be clear. The illusion of needing to be right is heavy. It weighs on our hearts, our relationships, and our spiritual growth. But when we set it down even for a moment, something beautiful happens. We feel lighter, we feel more open, we feel more human, and in that humanness, wisdom begins to bloom. Because the truth is simple, letting go of the need to be right does not make you less, it makes you whole. If something in today's sharing touched a quiet corner of your heart, I'd be grateful to keep walking this path with you. You can click the subscribe button below, not to follow me, but to gently remind yourself to return to moments of peace like this each week. We all deserve a place where our spirit can rest. And if you'd like, let this channel be that place for you.